Hey, what's up, pediatric chiropractors? You know what? I'm going to talk about, if you've been to a seminar, been to a training, you've heard me teach this for probably hours on end, and we go really, really granular in detail. But we're going to talk about specific kinds of birth intervention, which lead to birth trauma and subluxation. We're talking about cord wrapped, and we're talking about vacuum extraction births here, and how frequently they create really big, nasty, gnarly C2 subluxations. And then we're going to keep going for a couple minutes on this video. I'm going to give you the 8 S challenges. So they all start with the letter S. We're going to be very, colloquial, I think, here. It's like we're back in school and you're trying to memorize something for a test. Well, if I was teaching you a test about vacuum or giving you a test about vacuum extraction, cord wrapped, C2 subluxations, this is your study guide to know at least the surface level answers of the neurology behind this. And I'm going to go through all the bad stuff. So it goes without saying, but I'll just say it out of the gates here. So that means when you find these subluxations and annihilate these subluxations by adjusting them with the right tone, the right line of drive, the right torque, and the right frequency, when C2 primaries show up, they honestly, I know we all are like, C1 Atlas subluxations cause the most life-wrecking challenges. I'm not going to argue that neurological fact, but man, has this profession forgot about C2. And because there's so many of these birth interventions and breech positions, there is a huge under-adjusting happening of C2 in kids, and I hope I can make the case for that with this video. So we'll have some fun. Let's talk about C2 and the S's. First off, why would vacuum and a cord wrap sort of birth create more of a C2 primary rather than a C1? So I don't have a spine with me, so I'm going to charade this out with my hands, but you're through chiropractic school, you're either in it right now or you went through it. And so very much like for us at Palmer, first and second trimester, they were teaching us spinal anatomy and biomechanics. So y'all should have this one with my charades, all right? So here's what happens with a vacuum extraction birth. They take that suction cup, and so if you have a cord wrapped, by the way, they often come together. When the cord is wrapped around a child's neck, especially, and they're gonna make their way through the birth canal, as you know, there's less room in the end going through, and the head and neck is getting molded and getting squeezed. Now, if that cord is there as well, the cord, which is still the neurological pump. I know medicine always talks about blood pumping and that. Yeah, that's happening. But it's the neurological electrical cord. If that thing is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter, it's obviously going to shut the power down, and you're going to have that heart rate challenge, which is going to lead to the medical doctor, the OB, being much more emergent in nature, putting the suction and vacuum on and wanting to yank and pull, and we're going to talk about this in that order. So they're going to create axial, the yank, the farmer word is axial traction and distension, and then rotation to get the child out. And so here's what happens when you have axial traction first. The way we all know it as chiropractors, we know this anatomy better than anyone on earth. So occiput, the occipital condyle, and atlas, they're pretty well linked together. In fact, for the point of this video, they're super, super, super strongly biomechanically, and then muscles and ligaments, that occiput is really tethered to atlas in a big way. And when you lift, they tend to come together, okay? So they're gonna kind of ride this y-axis axial traction pull together. But then if you think of C2, so the odontoid process sits inside C1, and C2 on the bottom of it has a ton of facets to C3, C4, C5. So because of this interlinking system, remember school, bum, bull, bum, bum, bull, and they're all linked together, whatever C2 is going to happen to C2 is going to be very determinant of C3 and on down the chain because they're so linked together. That's not the case between C1 and C2. There's a lot more freedom of movement because there's not facets at the top of C2 going to the bottom of C1 in the same anatomy that there is below. I know, super, super nerdy. If I was a nerdy videographer, text guy, I would put that image in there and go with that. But again, I'm not even trying to show you the picture. I'm trying to show you what's happening during this birth. So now occiput and C1 are going to pretty much hang together. But when that rotation, so now there's been distension and separation of C1 and C2 because they're getting the head out for the baby. I know this is gnarly, but you have to know this because we've got to get this communication to them because we got to fix this. We are leaving C2 subluxated kids all over the world. We're not creating it, but we got to be the ones to fix it. And so now C1 and C2 are becoming separated. And because C2 is still inside, right? C2 and everything downstream is still connected through mom's nervous system and body, that's stuck. And so there's this pulling downward effectively while there's pulling upward effectively, just using the anatomy as I'm showing it here. And so now as they turn the head to get the torso out, there's going to be this counter torque, counter tension, counter rotation of C1 and C2. And what you're going to find in vacuum and cord wrapped kiddos is you're going to find C1 and occiput, absolutely a subluxated mess, but you're going to find it paired with C2. See, now I'm going to go back 100 years, and what Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Palmer, and they taught us, primary subluxations do not need to be singular. And I don't know where all of a sudden in our technique training and our adjusting training, we thought the idea that primary, I was stuck this way for 10 years. It took practice. It took not being able to clear primaries to see that a bunch of them are paired and they're coupled together. And it even says it in Stevenson. I should have grabbed it off the shelf here at the office for doing this video. Primaries can be subluxations. They can be plural. I don't know why I always say it French like that, but I do. And so there can be two segments subluxated at the same time that you need to care for as the primary, where C1 is one way and C2 is the other. And because a lot of us have very just, call it what it is, very underwhelming training in pediatrics, and because I'm fully certified in it, and through that course in those tracks, I didn't learn much C2 adjusting at all or any of the other tonal seminars and all the techniques. C2 is the long forgotten primary subluxation. And then it gets twice as bad, meaning we don't find it hardly at all outside of PX trained docs and PX pro docs from the Neuro-Tonal seminar, because I do this exact video for about an hour in there. But C1 goes one way and C2 goes the other, and you got to handle C2 together with C1. And so real quick, this is where the seminar just goes, and we show cases and scans, and we bring in patients, and we actually make the adjustments. We go through this. But I want to finish with a couple minutes about C2 and the S's. So here's what happens with C2 subluxations, and the neurology behind it causes this expression. So I'm going to list a bunch of symptoms and conditions. I don't see the subluxation in that viewpoint, but they do. The parents do. So they have to make sense of their child's struggles. You have to connect the dots of their struggles to subluxation and to neurology so that they understand they need to come to you on the right care plan to change neurology and get rid of subluxation, because that's what you want to do. But what they want is that plus change my child's lives. I have these 8 struggles. Or, a lot of kids, perfect stormers, have all of them. And if the C2 is gnarly enough, breech, cord wrapped, emergency, C-section, vacuum extraction sort of birth, they're probably going to have all 8 of these. Let me rip them through. Number 1, upper cervical subluxation, dysautonomia, that main air traffic control for the autonomic nervous system. You're going to have sustained sympathetic stress. So this child's going to be stuck on the gas pedal, brake pedal, vagus nerve is going to be interfered with. Number 2, as an infant, I'm going to try and follow the chronological life order as I list these 8 out, because these are where the struggles from a gnarly C2 subluxation will show up in life. Swallowing, latching, turning the head. So you get all the infant stuff. There's actually a bunch of conditions. Swallowing just happens to start with the letter S, so we start there. Swallowing, latching, feeding, digesting, and just being in the right headspace, right? So there's not torticollis and plagiocephaly. So if you have a C2 subluxation that's gnarly in an infant, you're going to have all that infant stuff. Number 3, they're going to have sinus congestion and real immune suppression. So you can kind of say suppression for the S or sinus congestion. So these are the kids who are going to get every teething is going to turn into an ear infection and a cold and RSV and croup, because they literally physically plumbing. C2 subluxations don't move, so they can't move fluid along, and then you have all the neuroimmune inflammatory cascade as well. Number 4, spatial awareness, and really so spatial awareness is an S word of saying motor planning, motor coordination. This motor system, the function of the neck, specifically the upper cervical, is the first motor developmental stage for the baby. Now, most motor charts, right, in an OT, PT, pediatrician office, they're not going to break it down in that beginning phase. They're going to be more worried about like, tummy time and rolling over and sitting up and then army crawling and all those things. Well, you got to break it down. We're the only profession that knows it actually begins more granular than that. You got to get really the neck moving. The upper cervical motor, neuromotor development matters most first to then set everything off. Why do you think those kids get delayed? Because they didn't do this well first. So number 5, if there's that neuromotor subluxation interference at C2, they're going to struggle with sensory and speech, okay? So 5 and 6, sensory and speech. I think I'm actually going to get to like 9 or 10, even more so. Every time I do this, I realize there's more than I think there is. So sensory and emotional processing and regulation, the business of C2. Speech, communication, especially the execution and the formation of the neuromotor, C2. Sleep, C2. Scoliosis, C2. If you have neuromotor discoordination and incoordination, again, a Stevenson term, subluxation creates incoordination. From a motor planning, structural balancing system, C2 will cause more neuromotor dyskinesia and dysposture challenges than anything else. It'll absolutely wreak havoc on the structure because the central nervous system is so confused with neuromotor input, and seizures is the worst, nastiest, gnarliest. We see the highest correlation with our seizure patients, which I don't know anybody else in pediatric chiropractic that probably sees more seizure cases, young, old, and everything in between, as far as the kid to young adult spectrum, than us. And they almost always have C1, C2 counter rotation, where C2 is the most important thing. Now, why would all that show up? I'll finish. I know, long video here, super nerdy. If you love this stuff, my goodness, get into our PX clinical training, get to the Neuro-Tonal seminar. I mean, we do this for 20 hours. And so here's the deal. If you go back to one of your earlier trimester classes again, I'm basically kind of bringing, which who thought this would ever happen? I'm bringing first trimester of my polymer education to life in practice every day through kids' everyday challenges. First, you got to know the spinal anatomy to really understand the havoc that C2 would create from those sort of birth interventions. So that's kind of where the spinal anatomy class would come in. And now CNS, that's what it was called for us, where we learned all the afferent and efferent spinal tracts and the neuromotor. So really the sensory motor track. Right brain controls left side of body and vice versa, which I want you to focus on. Muscles go through the nerves from the left side, sensory nerves on the left side of the body, and they're actually going to report to the right brain. Well, where does that cross over? It doesn't cross over above the foramen magnum. That track crosses over right at about the C2 level of the spinal cord and the brainstem. So a C2 subluxation is going to create the highest amounts of neuromotor incoordination you could come up with. And for a child, everybody knows this, not just in our profession, that sequential, smooth, on-schedule motor coordination matters most. And where do, like all the way jumping to the big one, where do seizures tend to show up when that stress that is too much, sympathetic dominant, subluxation, and too confusing, right, left brain, dyshemisphere challenges, the brain seizes when it's stressed out and confused. And where do those seizures typically show up? In the motor system with either contracture or shutdown. And so I have no idea how long I've been going on this video. Once I start talking about C2 subluxations, perfect storm, model, birth trauma, and interventions, I can't really slow down. But I can definitely add to it and go deeper. And if you love this stuff, comment below. I'd love to hear from you if this video helped you have a better understanding of birth trauma, specifically vacuum and cord wrapped and C2 subluxations. And if you love this stuff, will you please come hang with us for the Neuro-Tonal Certificate of Proficiency seminar course through Life University. If you love this, we literally have 60 hours online and 20 hours in person of this. And this is just one, it's not even a chapter. It's like a section within a chapter about advanced clinical correlations that we teach in that program that are taught from practice. I didn't learn this through a certification. I didn't learn this through school. I learned this by caring for tens of thousands of kids and taking the brain that God gave me, which used to be subluxated at C2 and now is not, and putting this clinical picture together. And I want so badly to get all of this to you. So I just hope we get as many people into those seminars. They sell out months ahead of time. And it's so worth it to earn your certificate of proficiency with the Pediatric Experience and Life University, because then through you, better understanding, better certainty, better clinical case management, better analysis, and neurotonal adjusting comes from you to these kids who are this nasty, this gnarly, this much subluxated, and you'll be able to change their lives. So I want you there so I can pour into you and teach you so you can pour into them and transform their lives. Hope to see you at a seminar soon. You got questions? Put them in the comments below. Tag somebody, share. You got your fellow. I know who you nerd out with. Tag them in here. Let's get this video in front of as many pediatric chiropractors as possible, because there is C2 subluxations walking discoordinated, not walking smoothly, get it, bad joke, all over your community, and they need you. See you on the next one.